Hello, my name is Starla Henderson, and this is Fronter House Quilt's blog, and we are working on our borders today for our fall sampler. We have already done the limbs, and we have done the tree trunk, so now before we do the leaves, it is time to do the borders. This is an odd size, and whenever I have an odd size block, I'm going to show you how I square that up. And the way I do it is I make a template out of freezer paper. In this case, this block is going to eventually, with the borders, it is going to measure, it's going to be cut down to 20.5 by 13 inches. And your actual border strips, I cut mine at 2.5 inches. Now you can make your border bigger if you want. It's up to you. It's your quilt. But I did mine at 2.5 inches. If you're going to machine quilt this, I would make it at least an inch bigger all the way around. In other words, I would do this at 4.5 inches because that gives you more room to work with. You don't have to sew clear to the edge of your border when you're machine quilting. That is much more difficult to control. If you can come to just an inch of it, you have a lot easier time keeping control of the quilt while you're working with it. This one, though, as far as the quilt block itself, will eventually be 20.5 by 13. Now, the way I did that was I take freezer paper, and you're going to cut your freezer paper at 20.5 by 13. Then you're going to take your quilt block, and you are going to center that piece of freezer paper onto your quilt block. And once you get it where you want it, and you may move it around a little bit, but you've got it centered the way you want it, you're just going to touch it with the iron a little bit and make sure that that freezer paper stays where you've put it. Then the next step is you're going to mark it. Now, there are a lot of different marking utensils out there. My favorite, especially if I'm wanting to take the marks back off, are the sew line pencils. I also use just cheap pencils, just cheap mechanical pencils that you can get at Walmart, which is what I'm going to use today because this pencil you can see the mark a little bit easier. If you're wanting to take a mark off of your quilt top, if you know that it's something that you may have to remove, always test it first. Now, I've done this several times, so I'm not so worried about it, and this should end up in the seam allowance unless for some reason you decide you don't like it and you can redo this. That's why I do this method. So use something this first time for you that you know you can remove. Test it on your quilt, on the fabric first that you used for your background. Always test first and make as light a mark as you can when you know you want it removed. Then take your ruler, once you've chosen your marking pencil, and line it up along the edge, and you are going to line it right up on the edge of where your freezer paper is. And it's just easier to mark this with the ruler. You've got a good solid edge. The freezer paper just tells you where to place your ruler, and you're going to mark it all the way around. I'm only going to mark two sides, but you would mark yours on all four sides. Once you've got it marked, then you're going to remove your freezer paper template, and you've got it there ready for you to go. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to take your strips, and I believe I cut for this 3 to start with, and your first strip is going to be, I make it my longest, which in the case of this quilt, it's the top and the bottom. And those would be cut at the 2.5 by 20.5. And I will lay that right along that mark where whenever you turn it, it would be, if you were cutting, this would be gone. This would be a raw edge. You're pretending that that mark is your raw edge. And you're going to lay this right up along that mark, pin it, take it to the sewing machine, and sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way down on both sides. Then you're going to press it, turn it over and press it just like you would any other seam. We're just going to lay this right over here for demonstration purposes. You're then, after you've got both of those on and you've pressed them, lay it out flat on a flat surface and measure through the center of your quilt from the edge of each border, edge to edge, and whatever that measurement is, that's what you cut for your two sides. Then you're going to do the same thing, and if it makes you feel better, especially if you cut a really big border, go ahead and take your ruler and extend these lines all the way out to the edge of your border, because you're going to sew over that. You're going to take your side borders and you're going to lay it along that edge just like you did before, and you still haven't cut anything. That's important. And you're going to sew 1/4 inch on both of those, top and bottom. Press those open. Now, you've got that done, and on the back you're going to have a lot of seam allowance. And I just go through then, once I've got that pressed open, both sides. And the last side that you sewed is going to be really easy. You can actually bend that back and just trim it off with a rotary cutter at 1/4 inch. The first sides, or in this case the longest, the top and the bottom, and this, on mine, it wasn't that much. It was just, you know, about a 1/4 inch over what seam allowance usually is. I haven't trimmed it out yet, and if I machine quilt this, which I might, I probably won't, because it's lying flat and it's not that much bulk. But you're going to trim this down just along that seam right there, and then just trim it out neatly with scissors, and just all the way down, all the way across, and then you've got your quilt top done. And that's the way I did this. This keeps me from making a lot of mistakes. And if this bulk here in this seam really bothers you, take out that little bit of a seam. It's not very much. Trim it, then lay it back down and sew it back. That wouldn't take you very long at all. In this case, there's not that much bulk, so I don't worry about it. But you're going to press this, and if you get this sewed on before you trim it, and there's something about it that's just not right, because sometimes that happens, you haven't cut anything. You can go back in. It's kind of a pain, but you can take all of these borders off and do the whole thing all over again. If the lines aren't right, you use a marking pencil that you can erase. Just take those lines off. Most likely, if it's a sew line, they're already going to be faded enough that you're not going to see them anyway. Make new lines, do it again. But this is a good way, especially if you've got an odd size block, to get it done, to trim it back and do it with fewer mistakes. If I'm using a standard size block, you know, a block that's got a ruler, square ruler for it, then I will use the ruler, and I'll center the ruler on the block and then cut around it. But this way I can get this odd size done, and if I don't like it the first time, I take it apart and do it over. And that does happen. It happens to us all. But that's how I put the borders on this quilt. Next time we will be working on the leaves. This is Starla Henderson with Fronter House Quilts blog. Thank you for joining me.